Harper Chen's hands trembled as she stared at the photo on her phone screen. Marcus, tanned and grinning, his arm wrapped around a blonde woman in a bikini. The tropical sunset behind them looked like something from a postcard. The caption made her stomach twist. "Living my best life. Thanks for setting me free, Harper." 3 hours. It had been 3 hours since he'd sent this, and she was still locked in the restaurant bathroom, her black dress wrinkled from gripping the fabric. Outside, Emma's engagement party continued without her. Laughter echoed through the marble walls, punctuated by the clink of champagne glasses and the soft jazz quartet she'd personally hired. Harper forced herself to look in the mirror. Reflections stared back, mascara slightly smudged, lips pressed into a thin line. 2 years. 2 years of believing Marcus when he said he needed space to find himself. 2 years of thinking they were on a break, not broken up. Apparently he'd found himself just fine, wrapped around another woman within 3 weeks of their separation. She tucked her phone into her clutch and smoothed her dress. Emma deserved better than a best friend hiding in the bathroom, wallowing in self-pity. Harper had planned every detail of this party, from the white roses cascading down the restaurant's columns to the custom menu printed on cream cardstock. She wouldn't let her personal disaster ruin Emma's perfect night. The main dining room had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Golden light from dozens of candles reflected off crystal glasses, and the scent of gardenias mixed with the restaurant's signature truffle oil. Emma glowed in her flowing cream dress, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured animatedly to a cluster of relatives. Harper grabbed a glass of wine from a passing waiter and painted on her brightest smile. "Harper, darling." Emma's Aunt Margaret materialized beside her, clutching a martini. "What a beautiful party you've planned. Emma told me you did everything." "Yourself. It was my pleasure," Harper replied, taking a generous sip of wine. "Emma deserves the best. And what about you, dear? When are we going to be celebrating your engagement?" Margaret's eyes sparkled with the kind of invasive curiosity that older relatives seem to specialize in. "You're 26 now, aren't you? Time is ticking." Harper's smile felt like it might crack her face. "I'm focusing on my art right now. My career is very demanding." It wasn't entirely a lie. Why, she was an artist. The fact that her demanding career consisted of a part-time job at Moonbeam Coffee and 3 paintings sold in the past year was beside the point. Margaret nodded approvingly and moved on to her next victim. As the evening wore on, Harper found herself reaching for wine more frequently than usual. The alcohol helped blur the edges of well-meaning questions about her love life and soften the ache in her chest every time someone mentioned finding the one. By 10 o'clock, she was definitely feeling the effects. Her laugh came to icily, and the room had taken on a pleasant, fuzzy quality. She needed air. The restaurant's outdoor patio was nearly empty, just a few scattered tables under string lights. The cool evening breeze felt like a blessing against her flushed skin. Harper was about to settle at an empty table when she noticed him. A man sat alone in the corner, nursing what looked like coffee. He was dressed simply in dark jeans and a gray sweater, nothing fancy, but something about him made her pause. Maybe it was the way he held himself, like he was carrying invisible weight. Or maybe it was how completely separate he seemed from the celebration inside, existing in his own quiet bubble. Wine had made her bold. Harper grabbed her glass and walked over. "Mind if I join you? The party's getting a bit much." He looked up, and Harper's breath caught. Dark eyes, intense and framed by thick lashes, met hers. His face belonged in magazines, all sharp angles and shadows, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. A 5 o'clock shadow added an edge of dangerous appeal. "I'm not really part of the party," he said quietly. His voice was deep, smooth. "I'm just waiting for someone. Well, whoever they are, they're missing out on good company." Harper settled into the chair across from him without asking permission. "I'm Harper, by the way. Professional party planner and current escapee from social obligations." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "James, professional nobody, currently unemployed." "Unemployed can be liberating," Harper said, raising her wine glass.
I.
To freedom from expectations. James raised his coffee cup. To unexpected encounters. They sat in comfortable silence, and Harper studied his face. Something about him seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it.
What?
He had one of those faces that reminded you of someone else. So what brings you to this particular restaurant? On this particular night, Harper asked, realizing she was probably being too forward but not caring. I was supposed to meet my lawyer here, James said, glancing at his watch. But he's running late. Very late. I was about to leave when I saw you storm out of the party looking like you wanted to fight someone. Harper laughed. A real laugh. This time? Was it that obvious? I thought I was being subtle. About as subtle as a hurricane. His smile reached his eyes now. Want to talk about it? Maybe it was the wine. Or maybe it was the fact that he was a complete stranger who would never see her again. But Harper found herself nodding. Ever have one of those days where you realize everything you thought you knew about your life was completely wrong? James leaned back in his chair, studying Harper's face with those impossibly dark eyes. Every day for the past month, he said simply. Something in his tone made Harper pause. There was a weight to his words that went beyond casual conversation. She found herself leaning forward, drawn in despite herself. My ex sent me a picture tonight, she heard herself saying. Him and his new girlfriend in some tropical paradise. The caption said, "Thanks for setting him free." She took another sip. Of wine. We were supposed to be on a break. Out. Turns out he was just breaking up with me in the most cowardly way possible. How long were you together? 2 years? 2 years of believing we were building something real? Harper's laugh was bitter. What about you? What's made your last month so enlightening? James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, the voice was carefully controlled. I found out my entire life was built on lies. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about who I am, about what I was supposed to inherit. He paused. Turns out my father had other plans. There was something in the way he said inherit that made Harper's wine-fuzzy brain perk up. Most people didn't use that word casually. But before she could ask, James continued. The lawyer. I'm supposed to meet tonight? Is handling my father's estate? Or what's left of it after my dear stepmother got finished? The bitterness in his voice matched her own. Apparently being the legitimate son doesn't count for much when you're not the favorite. Harper felt a strange kinship with this beautiful stranger. Both of them sitting in the wreckage of their expectations, both discovering that the people they'd trusted most had been lying all along. I'm sorry, she said, meaning it. That's horrible. Don't be. I'm better off knowing the truth. James finished his coffee and set the cup down with deliberate care. Even if the truth is that I'm now essentially homeless and jobless, the words hung between them. Harper should have felt awkward hearing such personal confessions from someone she'd just met. Instead, she felt something else entirely. A pull, magnetic and undeniable. You know what I think? She said, the wine making her voice softer than usual. I think we should stop talking about the people who screwed us over and focus on something better, such as... Harper stood, swaying slightly. The wine had definitely gone to her head, but she didn't care, such as the fact that you have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen, and I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying not to stare at them. James went very still. For a moment, Harper thought she'd overstepped, made a fool of herself. Then he stood too, moving with fluid grace that made her pulse quicken. You're drunk, he said, but there was no judgment in his voice. If anything, he sounded amused. Tipsy, Harper corrected. There's a difference. Drunk Harper would have already tried to kiss you. And what would tipsy Harper do? The question hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Harper stepped closer, close enough to catch the scent of his cologne. Something expensive and masculine that made her want to lean in further. Tipsy Harper would ask if you wanted to get out of here, she said.
Oh, maybe.
Find somewhere quieter. To continue this conversation, James's eyes searched her face, and Harper had the strangest feeling he was seeing right through her. Past the wine and the bravado to something deeper. You don't know anything about me, he said quietly. I know. Enough. I know you're kind enough to let a stranger sit at your table and complain about her ex. I know you're going through something difficult, but you're not taking it out on the world.
Oh.
I know you make me feel less alone than I have in months. Harper reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. Sometimes that's enough. For a heartbeat, she thought he might refuse. Then his fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and something electric passed between them. My hotel is 3 blocks away, he said. Harper felt her heart skip. This wasn't like her. She didn't go home with strangers, didn't make impulsive decisions fueled by wine and hurt feelings. But looking into James's dark eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers, she couldn't bring herself to care about what was typical for her. Let me just tell Emma I'm leaving, she said. She found Emma near the cake table, glowing with happiness as she fed David a bite of their engagement dessert. The sight should have made Harper smile. Instead, it reminded her of everything she'd lost, everything she thought she'd had with Marcus. Emma, I'm heading out, Harper said, leaning in to kiss her friend's cheek. Already? But we haven't cut the cake yet? Emma's face fell. Are you okay? You've seemed off all night. I'm fine. Just tired. The party is perfect, by the way. Everything you dreamed of? Emma's smile returned full force, thanks to you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all this. Be happy, Harper said, meaning it. That's all the payment I need. She made her way back to the patio, where James waited by the exit. What settled their bill, she realized, and was holding her jacket. Ready? He asked. Harper nodded, letting him help her into her jacket. His hands lingered on her shoulders for just a moment longer than necessary, and she felt that electric connection again. As they walked into the cool night air, Harper caught a glimpse of her reflection in the restaurant's window. Her hair was slightly mussed, her cheeks flushed from wine and anticipation. She looked like a woman about to make a decision that would change everything. She had no idea how right she was. Harper woke to silk sheets and sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment she lay still, trying to orient herself. This wasn't her apartment with its second-hand furniture and creaky radiator. This was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere expensive. The memories came flooding back in fragments. James's hands in her hair, the taste of wine on his lips, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer as they tumbled onto the king-size bed. Heat flooded her cheeks as she remembered how completely she'd lost herself in him, how every kiss had felt like drowning and being saved at the same time. She turned over, expecting to find him beside her, but the other side of the bed was empty, cool to the touch. Harper sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest, and looked around the hotel room properly for the first time. This wasn't just any hotel room. This was a penthouse suite, all modern luxury and pristine surfaces. The kind of place that cost more per night than Harper made in a month. Fresh flowers adorned the marble side tables, and through the windows she could see the city sprawling below them. "James?" she called out, but there was no answer. Harper slipped out of bed and padded across the plush carpet to the bathroom. Her reflection in the mirror told the story of the night before. Her hair was thoroughly mussed, her lips slightly swollen from kisses, and she had the telltale glow of a woman who'd been thoroughly satisfied. If she'd been in her own apartment, she might have smiled at the sight. Instead, unease settled in her stomach. She found her clothes scattered across the living room, evidence of their urgent need for each other the night before. As she dressed, Harper noticed details she'd been too wind-drunk and desire-drunk to see. The suite had a full kitchen stocked, with expensive champagne, original artwork hung on the walls. The furniture looked like it belonged in a design magazine. Who was James, really? And where was he now? She found her answer on the marble coffee table. A note written on hotel stationery, in bold, confident handwriting. Harper had to handle some business this morning. Didn't want to wake you. Order room service, whatever you want. Thank you for last night. Jay, no phone number. No call me later or let's do this again. Just a polite thank you, like she was. A service he'd hired. Harper crumpled the note in her fist, shame washing over her in waves. What had she expected?
Pots and flowers.
A declaration of love from a man she'd known for 3 hours. She'd been the one to suggest they leave together. She'd been the one who'd made it clear she wanted this to be simple, uncomplicated. So why did it hurt so much to be dismissed? She gathered her purse and headed for the door, desperate to escape the suffocating luxury of the suite. The elevator. Ride down seemed to last forever, her reflection multiplied in the mirrored walls. By the time she reached the lobby, Harper had convinced herself that this was for the best. A clean break. No messy complications. She was almost to the exit when she heard a familiar voice. Is that her? Harper turned, following the sound, and froze. Through the glass doors of a private conference room, she could see James sitting. At an enormous table surrounded by men in expensive suits, he looked different in the morning light, more serious, more intimidating. His gray sweater had been replaced by a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than Harper's rent. But it was the man speaking to him that made Harper's blood turn to ice. Richard Blackwell. She'd seen his face on magazine covers, in newspaper business sections. One of the wealthiest men in the country, with a reputation for ruthlessness that was legendary even in business circles. And he was looking directly at her through the glass? James followed his gaze and their eyes met across the lobby. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Regret? Then his expression went carefully blank, and he turned, back to the table, as if she didn't exist. Harper felt like she'd been slapped. She pushed through the hotel doors and out onto the sidewalk, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Whatever game James was playing, whatever his real story was, she didn't want any part of it. The morning air was crisp, a stark contrast to the heated atmosphere of the hotel. Harper hailed a taxi and gave the driver her address, trying to ignore the way her hands were shaking. As the city blurred past the window, she replayed every moment of the previous evening. James's expensive clothes that she'd assumed were simply well-chosen, his perfect manners, an educated accent, it's the way he'd paid their bill without looking at the total, it's the penthouse suite that he'd acted like was no big deal. How had she been so naive? By the time the taxi pulled up to her building, Harper had constructed a story in her mind. James was probably some rich businessman slumming it for a night, looking for a distraction from his real life. She'd been convenient, available, and too wind-drunk to ask the right questions. Her apartment felt smaller than usual after the hotel suite. The morning light streaming through her single window highlighted the scuff marks on her second-hand furniture, the stack of bills on her kitchen counter, 3 paintings leaning against the wall that represented her entire artistic output. For the month, Harper changed into pajamas and crawled back into her own bed, pulling the covers over her head. She had a shift at Moonbeam Coffee in 3 hours. But right now all she wanted was to forget that the previous night had ever happened. She almost succeeded, until her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." J. Harper stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. Whatever James thought they needed to discuss, she wasn't interested. She'd made one mistake. She wasn't about to make another. But as she lay in her bed, trying to fall back asleep, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that James's sudden reappearance in her life was just the beginning of something much more complicated than a one-night stand. 3 days passed before James showed up at Moonbeam Coffee. Harper was behind the counter, grinding beans for the afternoon rush, when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up from the espresso machine, and there he was, looking devastatingly handsome in another perfectly tailored suit. Several customers turned to stare, and Harper couldn't blame them. James commanded attention without trying. "We're closed for private events after 5, Harper said coolly, not looking up from the coffee she was preparing. "You'll have to come back tomorrow, Harper." His voice was low, urgent. "Please, 5 minutes." I said, "We're closed." She handed the latte to a waiting customer, forcing a bright smile. "Have a great day." James didn't move. He waited while Harper served 2 more customers, his presence a constant weight at the edge of her vision. Finally, when the coffee shop emptied, he approached the counter. "I don't talk to strangers," Harper replied, wiping down the espresso machine with more force than necessary. "You did more than talk to me 3 nights ago." Heat flashed through Harper's cheeks. That was a mistake. One I don't plan to repeat. Was it? James leaned against the counter, close enough that she could smell his cologne. The same scent that had surrounded her in that hotel room, that had clung to her skin for hours afterward. Because it didn't feel like a mistake when you were in my bed, saying my name, like stop. Harper's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. Go back to your business meetings and your penthouse suites and leave me alone. Something shifted in James's expression. You saw the meeting? Hard to miss when you're conducting it in a glass conference room in the hotel lobby. Harper finally looked directly at him. Tell me, do you make a habit of slumming it with broke artists? Is that your thing? Is finding vulnerable women at parties? And it wasn't like that. James's voice was fierce, almost angry, and you know it. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you lied about everything. Unemployed and homeless? Harper laughed bitterly. Right, that penthouse suite screamed desperate poverty. James ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. I didn't lie. Not exactly. Not exactly, that's rich. My name is James Blackwell, he said quietly. The words hit Harper like a physical blow. Blackwell, the same last name as the man she'd seen him with in the conference room. As in Richard Blackwell, he was my father. It was past tense. Harper felt some of her anger drain away, replaced by confusion. Was he died 2 months ago? Heart attack. James's voice was carefully controlled. I've been fighting his will. Ever since fighting it how? James glanced around the empty coffee shop, then back at her. Can we go somewhere more private? This isn't the kind of conversation to have in public. Every instinct Harper had screamed at her to refuse, to tell him to leave and never come back. But there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability that reminded her of the man she'd met on the restaurant patio, the man who'd seemed as lost as she was. There's a park 2 blocks north, she heard herself saying. I get off in 20 minutes. James nodded. I'll wait. The park was nearly empty in the late afternoon light. Harper chose a bench far from the playground, where the only sounds were distant traffic and the rustle of autumn leaves. Beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. My father built Blackwell Industries from nothing, James began. 30 years of his life poured into that company. When I was growing up, he always said it would be mine someday, that I was being groomed to take over. What changed? He remarried when I was 22. Christina was only 5 years older than me, gorgeous, ambitious. James's voice was flat. She gave him something I never could. A reason to question everything he'd planned. Harper waited, sensing there was more. The will was changed 6 months before he died. Christina gets 60% of the company, the house, most of the liquid assets. I get a trust fund that pays out monthly just enough to live on, but not enough to buy back control of what should have been mine. That's horrible, but it doesn't explain why you lied to me. James turned to face her fully. I didn't lie. The day we met, I just learned about the will. I was meeting with lawyers, trying to find a way to contest it. As far as I was concerned, I really was unemployed and essentially homeless. The penthouse was temporary, paid for by the estate while the lawyers sorted everything out. Something in his voice made Harper believe him, despite herself. In the meeting I saw? The one with your stepmother? Christina offered me a deal. A lump sum payout in exchange for giving up all claims to the company. I was supposed to decide that morning. James was quiet for a moment. I turned her down. Why? Because my father built that company with his own hands. Because it represents 30 years of his life's work? Because letting her sell it to the highest bidder would be like spitting on his grave. James's hands clenched into fists. And because I met someone who reminded me what it felt like to fight for something that mattered. Harper's heart skipped. James, I know you have every right to hate me. I know I should have told you who I was from the beginning. But Harper, that night with you was the first time in months I felt like myself. Not Richard Blackwell's son. Not the heir to a fortune. Just me. The sincerity in his voice was almost painful to hear. Harper found herself caught between anger and sympathy, between the urge to walk away and the desire to understand. What happens now? She asked. Now I fight. I have lawyers working on proving that Christina manipulated my father when he was sick, that she isolated him from family and friends. It's going to be ugly, and it's going to take time, but I'm not giving up. And what about us? Is there an us? James reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. I hope so. I know it's complicated. I know I've already messed this up. But Harper, I can't stop thinking about you. Not just that night, but you. Your strength, your passion, the way you make me laugh even when everything is falling apart. Harper looked down at their joined hands. 3 days ago, she'd convinced herself that James was just another rich man playing games. Now she was seeing something else entirely. A man fighting for his father's legacy, dealing with betrayal from the people closest to him, trying to navigate a world that had suddenly become hostile. A man not so different from her, really. This is crazy, she whispered. Probably, James. Agreed. But sometimes the best things are. Harper met his eyes, seeing her own uncertainty reflected there. Whatever came next, she had the feeling her life was about to become far more complicated than she'd ever imagined. But maybe for the first time in months, complicated didn't sound so bad. 6 weeks later, Harper stood in the lobby of Blackwell Industries, wearing the most expensive dress she'd ever owned. James had insisted on buying it for her, claiming she needed armor for what was about to happen. Looking up at the gleaming glass tower that housed his father's empire, Harper thought he might have been right. You don't have to be here, James said quietly beside her. He looked devastating in his black suit, but Harper could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set for battle. Yes, I do. Harper straightened her spine. We're in this together, remember? The past 6 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal meetings, private investigators, and late-night strategy sessions. Harper had watched James transform from the broken man she'd met at the restaurant into someone harder, more focused. The lawyers had found what they were looking for. Christina had indeed manipulated Richard Blackwell during his final months, isolating him from old friends and business partners, feeding him lies about James's loyalty and competence. More damning still, they discovered that Christina had been funneling money from the company into her own accounts, preparing to sell Blackwell Industries to a competitor the moment the will was probated. Today was the final board meeting. Today, James would present the evidence and reclaim what was rightfully his. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. When the doors opened, they were greeted by Christina herself, stunning as always, in a white power suit that probably costs more than Harper's monthly rent. James, Christina purred, her smile sharp as a blade. How lovely to see you. Tea brought your little coffee shop girlfriend. How sweet. Harper felt James tense beside her, but his voice remained perfectly controlled. Christina, shall we get this over with? The boardroom was exactly what Harper had expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows, an enormous mahogany table, leather chairs that probably cost more than her car. The board members were already seated. 12. Men and women in expensive suits who held the power to decide James's future. Christina took her place at the head of the table. Every inch the confident CEO. Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for coming. I know James has some concerns about the company's direction, but I assure you, actually, James interrupted. Standing smoothly, I have more than concerns. I have evidence. The next hour was brutal. James's lawyers presented their case with surgical precision. Financial records showing Christina's theft. Audio recordings of her manipulating Richard during his illness. Testimony from household staff about how she'd isolated the old man from anyone who might have talked sense into him. Harper watched Christina's confident mask crack bit by bit. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing between James and the woman who'd been planning to sell their company out from under them. This is ridiculous, Christina finally snapped, her composure cracking completely. You can't prove any of this. Richard was perfectly competent when he changed his will. Actually, we can prove it. James pulled out a final folder. Medical records show that my father was suffering from early-stage dementia during the months leading up to his death. His doctor has provided a statement confirming that he was not competent to make major financial decisions. The room went dead silent. Christina's face went white, then red, then white again. The will is invalid, James continued calmly, which means the company reverts to me as the sole legal heir. Security's already changing the locks on your office, Christina. Your personal items will be packed and sent to you. You can't do this, Christina snarled, jumping to her feet. I'll fight this. I'll take you to court. With what money? James smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. The accounts you've been stealing from have been frozen. Your credit cards have been canceled. Belonged to my father. You have until tomorrow to vacate. Christina looked around the room desperately, seeking support from the board members. She found none. One by one, they began to stand, offering James their congratulations and support. Harper watched it all with a mixture of admiration and something that might have been fear. This was James in his element, ruthless and unforgiving. It was impressive, but it was also a reminder of just how different their worlds were. Later that evening, they celebrated at the same restaurant where they'd first met, the same patio where Harper had joined a mysterious stranger at his table. It felt like a lifetime ago. So what happens now? Harper asked, swirling the wine in her glass. You're officially a billionaire CEO. That's got to feel good. It does, James admitted. But it's also terrifying. I have a company to rebuild, a reputation to repair. It's going to take years. You'll do it, Harper said, meaning it. You're stronger than you think. James reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You know that, right? You gave me the strength to fight when I was ready to give up. Harper felt her cheeks warm. I didn't do anything special. You did everything special. James's voice was soft, intimate, despite the restaurant's bustling atmosphere. You reminded me who I was underneath all the family drama and corporate politics. You made me remember what it felt like to be just James, not Richard Blackwell's son or Christina's victim. And now, who are you now? James smiled, the real smile she'd fallen in love with. I'm the man who's completely, utterly in love with an artist named Harper Chen. The man who wants to spend the rest of his life proving that fairy tales can come true. Even for broke coffee shop employees and disgraced heirs. Harper's heart stopped. James, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other for 2 months. But Harper, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Marry me. The restaurant seemed to fade away around them. Harper stared at the box, then at James's face, seeing nothing but love and hope and terrifying sincerity. You're insane, she whispered. Probably, but I'm also right. We're right. Tell me you don't feel it too. Harper thought about the past. 2 months. The late nights planning legal strategy. It's the way James held her when the stress became too much. The morning she'd woken up in his arms and realized that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped thinking about Marcus entirely. The way James looked at her paintings like they were masterpieces. Even the ones that were clearly amateur work. The way he'd insisted on putting her art up in his temporary apartment. Claiming it made the place feel like home, the way he'd supported her dream of a gallery showing. Using his connections not to buy her success, but to get her work in front of the right people. Open it, she said. James's hands shook slightly as he opened the velvet box. Inside was the most beautiful ring Harper had ever seen. Not ostentatious or flashy, but elegant and timeless. A perfect diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the candlelight like stars. It was my grandmother's, James said quietly. The only piece of family jewelry Christina didn't get her hands on. I've been carrying it around for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. Harper looked at the ring, then at James's face, then back at the ring. 2 months ago, she'd been mourning the end of a relationship she'd thought was real. Was being offered something she'd never even dared to dream about. Love. Real love. Complicated and challenging and absolutely terrifying. Yes, she said. James blinked. Yes, you insane, wonderful man. Yes, I'll marry you. Harper laughed, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I have conditions. James slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady now. Name them. I keep working. I keep pursuing my art. I don't become some trophy wife who gets her picture in Society magazines? Done. What else? We do this right. No rushing, no huge society wedding that's more about your business connections than about us. Something real? Whatever you want. James brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. Anything else? Harper pretended to think. I want to redecorate that sterile penthouse of yours. I don't want a studio. A real one, with north-facing windows and enough space for large canvases. Already ordered. The contractors start Monday. Harper stared at him. Yeah? You were that confident I'd say yes? I was that hopeful? James's smile was softer now, vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. Harper, I need you to know that this isn't about gratitude or some misguided sense of obligation. I'm not proposing because you helped me get my company back. Then why? Because when I look at you, I see my future. It's not the one I planned or the one I thought I wanted, but the one I actually need. You make me better. You make me real. James paused, his dark eyes serious. Because I love you. Not the idea of you, not the convenience of you, but you. Your terrible coffee-making skills, and your stubborn streak, and the way you cry at romantic comedies, but claim you don't. I do not cry at romantic comedies. I cried at the insurance commercial last week. That was different. Dog was very convincing. James laughed, and the sound was pure joy. See? This is what I mean. Make everything better, even the hard parts. Harper looked down at the ring on her finger, still hardly believing it was real. The diamond caught the restaurant's candlelight, throwing tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. So what happens now? She asked. Do we ride off into the sunset? Live happily ever after? We work for it, James said simply. Marriage isn't a fairy tale ending, it's a beginning. We're going to have to figure out how to blend your world and mine. How to make room for your art and my business responsibilities. How to stay ourselves while becoming something new together. That sounds complicated. The best things usually are. James signaled for the check. But I have a feeling we're up for the challenge. As they walked out of the restaurant hand in hand, Harper caught sight of their reflection in the window. She looked different than she had 2 months ago. Stronger, more confident, happier. The woman in the reflection looked like someone who knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to fight for it. James squeezed her hand. Regrets? Harper thought about Marcus, about the life she'd thought she wanted, about the version of herself who'd hidden in restaurant bathrooms and accepted being treated as an afterthought. That woman felt like a stranger now. None, she said, and meant it completely. 6 months later, Harper stood in her first solo gallery showing, watching strangers examine her paintings with genuine interest. Several pieces had already sold, red dots marking her success. The studio James had built for her had been worth every penny. She was explaining her technique to a potential buyer when she felt familiar hands settle on her waist from behind. How's our famous artist doing? James murmured in her ear. Your famous artist is doing very well. Thank you. Harper leaned back against his chest, still amazed by how perfectly they fit together. 3 more sales since you left to take that call. Excellent. Christina's lawyers finally agreed to the settlement terms, by the way. She gets a lump sum and disappears forever. No more appeals, no more harassment. Good, I was getting tired of the threatening phone calls. James turned her in his arms, his expression serious. You know I'd never let her hurt you, right? Or anyone else for that matter, I know. But I can take care of myself too, you know. I'm tougher than I look. Believe me, I'm well aware. You're the strongest person I know. James brushed a strand of hair from her face, ready to go home. Mrs. Soon-to-be Blackwell. Harper glanced around the gallery one more time, her paintings, her success, her dreams made real. Then she looked at James, at the man who'd supported every crazy idea and ambitious goal, who'd never once asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. Ready, she said. As they walked out into the cool evening air, Harper realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the desperate, clinging kind she'd confused with love before, but something deeper. Something earned through honesty and compromise, and the daily choice to keep. Building something beautiful together. Behind them, the gallery glowed with warm light, her paintings visible through the windows. Ahead of them lay home, marriage, and whatever challenges and joys the future might bring. It wasn't the ending Harper had planned for her story. It was infinitely better. The end asterisk, like this video if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. And let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.